What Do You Know by Mark Lawson, with Roger Allam as DCI Parsons.
The stupid thing is, I couldn't find the phone. The kitchen cordless at first. You'll either know or you'll have read that the pictures are incredibly vivid when something like this happens. And so I remember quite clearly that the receiver was finally to be discovered under the Daily Telegraph, which was folded open to the crossword. I was only 2 clues short that day, which is one of those little signs you take, like all the traffic lights suddenly being green in a row on a journey you do every day, that your life is running smoothly.
Barbara? Hello, it's Dan.
Which was a surprise for a start, because to my memory, Daniel had only ever rung us himself 3 times, to say that Jack and Jessica had been born, and to tip us off about Natasha's surprise 40th.
Barbara, it's Tash.
When he said, "It's Tash," I thought, stupidly or perhaps hopefully, that he was about to put her on the line, like an old-fashioned telephonist. But of course what he meant was, it's about Tash.
I don't know where she is.
We have a family liaison officer, and we're polite enough, but we don't tell her anything. We're the wrong sort of people for all that.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is as much as we know at the moment. Natasha Lonsdale, a 44-year-old woman, has not been seen since Wednesday, March the 18th, 5 days ago. We are increasingly concerned for her safety. Mrs. Lonsdale was reported missing late on that evening by her husband, Daniel. He had become concerned when she was not at home when he returned from work. The last confirmed record we have of contact with Mrs. Lonsdale was a text sent to her husband, timed at just before 1300 hours that day, saying that she was going to walk the dogs.
I read in the Telegraph that couples who lose a child, a grown child, not when they're babies, terrible though that is, because in a way you can always replace them. The article said that bereaved parents are vastly more likely to get divorced. And though I think that Barbara and I are going to get through this, I can understand why that would be the case. Because I think in a way, no matter how much you like or love each other, parenting is a competition. Which of you loves them the most? Which of you do they most love? Who knows the best way to bring them up? And so, if you lose a child, it's the biggest contest of all. Yesterday, Barbara came into the barn conversion and found me laughing at a comedy on television. I just needed to think about something else for half an hour. But the anger on her face, you'd think she'd walked in on me watching porn.
Dick, Dosh, Doolally, dragged. The first DCI I worked under used to say that those were the 4 main reasons a person would suddenly disappear. The word's dated, I guess. These days it would be variations on the letter F, and I'm sure Doolally is ruled out by the Force's Sensitive Language Initiative. But the basic principle remains. In the case of a Miss Purr, somewhere in the depths of police history, someone decided they were too busy to say missing person in full. It's usually because they've lost money, found love, that they've gone a bit nutty, or they've been unlucky enough to bump into a nutter. So, into which of these categories did Natasha Lonsdale fit? Her 4-wheel drive was left on her side of the double carport at home, so that means a hire car, a lift, or she legged it to a public transport hub of some kind. If she was losing her mind, she didn't seem to have thought fit to tell anyone close to her, and the GP wasn't treating her for anything, which meant it came down, as it usually does, to her last known movements. And early on we had a bit of luck. Mrs. Lonsdale's phone had disappeared with her, but she was signed up to one of those deals where everything you store in it is backed up on a hard drive at Fleece HQ. It's a precaution, of course, against the handset being lost or stolen, but it also comes in more than handy if you vanish. Her electronic diary showed the engagements for the day she disappeared as 9:30 a.m. dentist, Westbury, 10:15 a.m. shopping, Westbury, 11 a.m. D, just the letter D, 1:15 p.m. audit, 3:30 p.m. hair. And there are so many stories there already. But the first two things you think are, well, whatever audit is, it was happening at the exact time she'd told the husband she was walking the dogs. Oh, and D, the 11 a.m. meeting. Was that Dan, the husband, or someone else?
Listen, I know you think I did it. Everybody thinks I did it. It's the look people give you. When you imagine this happening, and I think we've all imagined the people we love being murdered, haven't we? Haven't we? You think the problem's going to be dealing with all the sympathy. Like how many responses are there in the end to, I'm really sorry. But actually, it's the suspicion that gets you. The reporters at the gate, the coppers on the doorstep, the bloggers on Westbury.com. You know they're all thinking, it usually turns out to be the husband. The way the main cop, for example, would just seize on phrases I used. What? Oh, I used the expression, take time out, I suppose, because I have to consider the possibility that Tash had some reason to want to get away.
And do you know of any reason?
Not specifically. It's funny. I just find myself wishing that she had some reason to walk out, even if that reason turns out to be me, rather than consider the alternative.
Invention of a deflecting fiction? Or better a divorcee than a widower? Good questions, both. Unlike my next, which was stupid. Would you say you were happily married, Mr. Lonsdale?
Can that ever come down to a yes and no answer?
Not in my case. Cases, mate. But this is work, not home.
A long marriage, and we're coming up to 22 in October, is a long story. Along the way, there are some snapshots you'd want in an album, some you wouldn't. We've always, in the end, wanted to be together. I suppose I had a slight apprehension that... No.
Go on.
I suppose this is how cops work. Journalists as well, probably. This desperation we have to be helpful to tell people what they want to know. I sometimes even felt actually bad because I couldn't tell a tourist where What's-It Street was. So I told the soft cop, without actually using that horrible term empty nesters, that I supposed I had wondered if we might hit the buffers when both the children were gone.
Gap years. Mainly taken by students at 18, but some people suddenly schedule one in their 40s without telling anyone. Statistically, it accounts for a significant number of mispers. A lot of what the husband was saying led in that direction, but was that a sneaky steer? So we worked every possibility. There was a joint account, pretty flush, even at a time when half the business types in Britain were checking which fire escape led to the roof. Hubby is a financial director of the Borough Council, which means good beans both now and when he jacks it in. And Mrs. L has a high-end catering business, which, her diary seemed to suggest, was due for audit on the day she disappeared.
The finger-pointing started on Westbury.com, then rapidly went national and international. I became fixated on a site called Crime Central, where, as far as I could tell, the unemployed in the Western world would stay online all night trying to solve real-life mysteries, including, now, the case of someone variously described as that poor woman, the posh bird, the English broad, the missing bint, the abducted mother, the murdered wife, and, overwhelmingly, Natasha. Tasha. Nat. As if they actually knew her. Across all time zones, the consensus, massively, is that Tash is dead and that I killed her. Someone called Morse 714, God, can 700 of these public dicks really have chosen the same name, says, always their guy who killed them, always. Columbo 69 agrees. In a year, he'll have married his slut. No good can come from reading all this, but I cannot stay away. A button at the edge of the screen invites me to join the conversation. I almost do.
In a case like this, it's rule one to truffle through the rubbish bins at the last known address of the departed. Ideally, of course, you're looking for blooded gloves and a discount voucher from Ropes R Us. Usually the best you get is enough evidence to lock up the whole family on irregularities involving recycling bins. Natasha Lonsdale's bequest to us was some torn receipts from local emporia. At the butcher and greengrocer, Natasha bought meat and vegetables from Meal for Two, ingredients discovered in her fridge and pantry, suggesting that either she planned to cook hubby's supper or wanted it to look as if she did. Then at the chemist she bought toothpaste and shampoo and something listed on the receipt as chemist goods. Does that mean she was packing an overnight bag and making sure that her Barnet and her Nashers would shine for someone? Or were they decoy purchases to distract from the embarrassment of the other things she needed? Because chemist goods is used on till bills to disguise what are called sensitive items. At Natasha Lonsdale's local apothecary, as at many, these are hemorrhoid creams and condoms. The image on the CCTV is so crap that you can't see which one she's buying, and the gormless assistant can't remember. The inventory shows that they sold 2 packets of brat stoppers and 2 tubes of bum cream that morning, which gives you some sense of the balance between pleasure and pain on an average Wednesday in Westbury. But we didn't chase that up straight away because, a week into the investigation, an interesting little squiggle. The DC, trawling through the backup of her electronic organiser, finds a couple of entries going back along the lines of D, 75 party, and M and D, lunch. So could D be the dad? Had she met him at 11 on the day she disappeared?
There's an article they run every so often in the colour supplements. A spread of photographs of movie stars with their latest husbands or partners. And in the corner of the picture, there'll be a snap of the celebrity's father. Now, the point is, of course, that the men they're with are the spits of their dads. But I've seen it argued that a girl only goes for a lad who looks like dad if they've had an unhealthy or obsessive relationship. So perhaps I should be flattered that Dan isn't like me at all. Not at all. It's only fair to say that we've had reservations about Daniel, whether he was quite the ticket for her. She always seemed to be the one with the gumption in that couple. I said to Barbara once that I wasn't entirely sure they would have a house or car or holidays at all if it were left to him to organise them. But they seemed happy enough together, and so we left them to it.
The obvious comparison for a public appeal is fishing. As soon as the switchboard starts trilling, you know it's going to be every care in the community patient within a 40-mile area claiming to have killed her, to have seen her, or actually to be her. Then there's sofa Sherlocks and the armchair psychics and the God has told me's and the lonelies who call up any phone number that's given out just so that their lips don't actually stick together that day. But just occasionally, down among the bent bicycles, the sodden mattresses and the broken bottles, an actual bite on the line. A waitress in the Westbury High Street cafe reports a ringer for the MISPA being seen there at 11 a.m. on the day she vanished with a man. 70s, posh, jacket and tie, same mouth and nose as her, had the look of daughter and...
The first thing the detective inspector said when he called was,
"This is not bad news."
I imagine they have to say that in case you think that they've found it. No, I can't actually say the word. But it wasn't exactly good news either. They got me on the mobile at the golf club.
He offered to come to the station. The first thing he said was,
"Oh dear, this is going to be terribly embarrassing."
You expect more resistance from a witness. When I asked him if he'd met his daughter on the morning she disappeared, he just said,
"Oh dear. Yes, I'm afraid I did."
But when a colleague of mine asked your wife that, you'd have thought we were cold-calling double glazing.
Yes, you see, Barbara wouldn't have known.
The doorbell rang and there was a reporter. One of the ones who's been there since the start. About Natasha's age. Even a look of her. I don't know if that's a coincidence or if it's a policy on these tabloids to send along someone who might make you open up. Well, the other day she knocked and asked if she could use what she called our toilet. She swung her handbag a little, presumably to hint that it was her time of the month. I didn't fall for it. But this time, she said, nice as a Girl Guide, was I aware that my husband was at the police station being questioned about our daughter's disappearance? I said, not so much being questioned as being answered, I'd imagine. They keep us in touch with the investigation as you'd expect. Inside, I was trying to remember the chart on Dr. Albright's wall about maximum heart rate in a woman of 69. But on the surface, I was perfectly calm. One of the first things I remember my mother saying to me, probably when she'd been summoned to the headmistress over a run-in with the school bully, never let them see you're in trouble.
How stupid can you be? I imagined that the surprise appearance of Tash's dad as a suspect might stop the bloggers from rattling the handcuffs in my direction quite so loudly. However, within minutes of the news breaking, Morse 714 had adjusted his deductions to suggest that my father-in-law and I were in it together, following Tash's discovery of our secret paedophile ring.
Increasingly in cop work, the forensics do it for you. The blood or sweat tells the story. But sometimes, still, it's just a feeling. Do I believe what this person is telling me? Desmond Lonsdale said,
What happened, Detective Chief Inspector, is that it's Barbara's 70th next month. In the nicest possible way, she's the sort of person who says that she doesn't want any fuss made, but then complains when nobody makes any. So Natasha and I were planning a surprise party for her.
And you never felt it was relevant, when your daughter became the subject of a missing persons inquiry, to tell us that you'd seen her on the day she disappeared?
I can see that was stupid of me. There were two things. It somehow seemed a bad time to tell Barbara I'd been lying to her, even for an innocent reason. And I was utterly convinced, she'd turn up. And we'd have the party anyway.
A secret Daddy and daughter were keeping from Mummy. A secret the police would never have known about until one conspirator vanished. Were there other things hidden in that family?
Living in a country that spends most nights of the week watching pretend murder investigations, you think you pretty much know what's coming. But they still surprise you.
This may seem a strange question, Mr. Lonsdale, but did your wife suffer from hemorrhoids at all?
My first thought, too much CSI, was that they found a body so horribly mutilated that it could somehow be identified only by piles. But then he asked,
And this may seem an intrusive inquiry, but what method of contraception did you and Mrs. Lonsdale use?
When I told them I'd been doctored, I caught a little glance between Parsons and the younger one. Great, I thought. They found a ton of rubbers in her handbag.
The point is that most people, when they die young or unexpectedly, leave some kind of mess. Money, sex, other kids, things they wish they hadn't said to people or wish they had. Stuff they'd eventually have got round to sorting out, and if they're lucky, it stays under the grass. How many funeral congregations must have held a secret lover or two, hiding under the crowd cover of all the crying? In reality, we live as if we expect to be there tomorrow, and a lot of tomorrows. But if you don't come home one day when you were supposed to, you get my size 13s all over your life.
I must have read about hundreds of missing people, and until now, I'd never noticed the connection with the way that lovers talk. Early on, at least. I'll miss you. Missing you. Missing you already. And then they disappear. And it ought to be the same word. The person you miss is missing, but actually it's different because this missing covers so many possibilities. Abducted, murdered, or just buggered off with someone else. And then there's nobody. Innocuous little thing, hardly notice it in conversation. There was nobody there, nobody could disagree with, a bit of a nobody. But the police use it in a different way.
Nobody has been found.
Or
There have been cases of a successful prosecution for murder, even though no body has been found.
not such a nothing word now, is it? There was no body in the house. No body knows what happened. She is no body to me.
The sex lives of one's children must be high among the subjects better left in a well-functioning family, decently undiscussed. Like one's sex life with one's husband, or indeed one's husband's sex life without one. Oh dear, I sound like the Queen. Grammatically, I mean, not in subject matter, one imagines. And now one finds one's daughter all over the papers as some sort of femme fatale. A network of secret lovers, said one of the papers, and the detective chief inspector told us that was rubbish, that they were interested
In talking to only 2 or 3 men who Natasha may have been involved with in some way.
only 2 or 3. The policeman was insistent from the beginning.
I want to be clear that we don't make moral judgments about the people we investigate. We're interested in exploring Natasha's private life only in as far as it may be relevant to what happened to her.
Well, they may not make moral judgments anymore, but I do. And do you know what it's like to discover that your daughter is some sort of trollop?
Do you know, I would go as far as to say that the single biggest obstacle to solving crimes in Britain is adultery. I'm serious. In most investigations, there's at least one potential witness, a pedestrian or a driver spotted near the scene, who never comes forward, regardless of the number of appeals. And sometimes, sure, that's the perp. But far more often, I'm convinced, it's an innocent witness who daren't say anything because they shouldn't have been in that part of town at that time. And so, to save our reputations and relationships, we are letting murderers go free.
The majority of our friends, I'd say, have seen the marriages of at least one of their children end in divorce. And so we'd been lucky, we thought. Perhaps we even believed that our own example had helped. Although any handbook to marriage written by Barbara and me would advocate strategic distance and considerable grey areas, which, of course, I now realise is what Tasha may have done.
I actually find myself thinking, I hope she bloody well has been murdered, the little tart.
Natasha Lonsdale had 2 phones that we know of so far, one for private, one for business. She called a lot of strange men on her work mobile, which was fair enough, because she was probably catering for them. But we're working through them to see if any of them were catering to her.
I deliberately arranged to miss Crime Watch because I've heard they're doing an item in Nat. And so I tell Kate I have some rush work to do on the Anderson Plastics receivership. It has to be said that this recession has been tremendous for accountants with a double life. When you announce you have a sudden meeting or an avalanche of paperwork, people look sympathetic. But I've completely forgotten that they do that update just after the news, so I'm sitting with Kate when, on our giant Guess My Paycheck flat screen, there's suddenly the crisp blonde one, who's a great loss to terminal care nursing, saying, "Some promising calls on the disappearance of Natasha Lonsdale." And the copper in the studio says,
One potentially very significant sighting, Kirsty, and some interesting connections in Mrs. Lonsdale's professional life.
and I think he's trying to be discreet, but that makes her sound like a slut or a gangster, and the audience is supposed to think slut. And Kate says, "Oh, Nick, poor woman." And I think, when it all comes out, you'll really beat yourself up for ever having said that. And the coppers must have given the steer to the local rag, because there it is next day. Motel mystery of missing woman. A woman fitting the description of the vanished 44-year-old superior caterer. Superior caterer. Nat would have liked that. had been seen 10 days previously at the Oasis Motor Lodge at Junction 23. She was reported to have been with a slim, good-looking, how ridiculous to feel flattered in these circumstances, businessman whose image was captured on a CCTV camera. Bracket, right, bracket. I look right. Damn.
It's a common complaint in the reports they write after our disasters. Let me tell you, if you haven't been called unfit for purpose, you've had a sheltered life these days, that British coppery isn't joined up enough. So now we have a cross-flag system, like those alerts people have to tip them off about mentions of Cheryl Cole, Tweedy, on the internet. And so a DS on the team called and said, Peter McAndrew, boss, who we have down as one of Natasha Lonsdale's POIs, that's people of interest, has just been reported missing. Sue McAndrew told me how her husband hadn't come back from a business trip to Bristol. When I asked her, Mrs. McAndrew, did you or your husband ever have any dealings with Natasha Lonsdale? She said, you mean the lady who disappeared? And repeated, or your husband, with a little tremble on the stroke. And I knew she knew. So, another satisfied member of the public, having been reassured that while we have absolutely no idea where her missing husband is, we're pretty sure he's been with a missing posh bird, who we've also completely failed to find. Leaving her house, I checked the magic rectangle and there's a message that a bloke just walked into Westbury Central and said...
My name's Nick Hunter, and I think I may have some information about Natasha Lonsdale.
Apparently, he spoke so quietly at the desk that they had to ask him to repeat it.
They took me to a side room. When I told them I believed I was the guy seen at the Oasis Motor Lodge with Natasha Lonsdale as I called her, which made her seem distant, official, dead. They said I should wait for DCI Parsons to get back.
My best mate from uni's a GP now, and we both agree that in the end, it's an instinct. People will tell you the absolute opposite of what the case is, but you ignore that and you just develop a sense, a sensor. How sick is this person? The first thing he said was,
Look, suppose I hadn't killed her, which I haven't, and I don't know where she is, which I don't. But I do know something. I should tell you, right?
Parsons' first law of non-detection, the adulterous witness. But finally, here was someone who put a murder investigation before their marriage. God bless you, sir. Although I have to admit that I can't quite work out where you, as it were, fit in.
The irony of Westbury Road bus station wasn't lost on me. The Friday or Saturday nights I'd grumpily gone without my half of the bottle of Cab Sauv or Sauv Blanc, which Dan would then drink as well as his half, so that I could pick Jessica up from some teenage party, and she wouldn't have to get the N147 from there. I never quite specified the risk, but rape, mainly, and drugs, and meeting the people who we'd paid a lot of money to avoid her being at school with. And here I was, on a Wednesday afternoon, in jeans and a baseball cap, and what used to be called a bomber jacket, clothes my family didn't even know I had in my wardrobe, waiting to buy a ticket to Wakefield.
4 reasonable suspects so far. The husband, the dad, Peter McAndrew, and now Nick Hunter. Dan Lonsdale had denied any involvement at all, and I believed him. Desmond Drummond pleaded guilty to a secret birthday party, and I was prepared to take him on trust as well. This Nick, as well, admitted that he was guilty of something, but not an abduction or murder. Did I believe him?
I met Nat through a do we had at work. We were celebrating a record year, and the chairman had suggested we could get away from vol au vents and plonk. It's the master chef effect. The British have suddenly turned all French about food. So we asked if any of us knew someone who had a way with a prawn, And there was this woman who had done my brother's wedding. The chairman said, "Nick, can you get your lady back?" Nat did the summer garden party for clients, the Christmas bash, the budget briefing drinks. Soon, we were having lunch to try out new dishes at her place because she needed her kitchen. She said,
"I'd like you to have it while it's hot."
she was only talking about food. I'm sure she was. It's only men who say that kind of thing with any intention. But I probably raised an eyebrow, which put the subject on the table. I'm sure I'm more than half to blame, but we were both throwing out hints, like people do. The kids left home, her busy husband, funerals of good friends who died of cancer, making you think the time is to be used. She said,
The empty nester. Such a cliché.
I said,
I think clichés are popular for a reason.
when I kissed her, she said,
Not here. Maybe, but not here. Westbury Road bus station, so long demonised in the Lonsdale family, didn't entirely fit the billing of hell. A stink of piss, yes, and those slide and drop machines for fizzy drinks and chocolates with more than half the trays empty. But I didn't feel frightened, just self-conscious. As my co-conspirator had advised me, I bought my ticket at the automatic machine. The fewer conversations, the fewer memories, he had said. Cash as well, not card. For weeks now I've been putting 5s, 10s, 20s in an envelope in the safe, every few days, building up a stash. Dan would never look in there, until he needs my will. I imagined him thinking of me dead, and felt not guilt, but adventure.
when they called the motel the Oasis, I assumed they were joking. They can't seriously have imagined a driver in the A13 falling upon this brown brick bungalow like a camel driver seeing water in the distance. When Nat arrived, she looked nervous, but I thought, well, you would, wouldn't you? So am I. On the bed, we were awkward with each other like teenagers. I thought, it's 20 years since I worried about where I could put my hand next. My advance on second base was interrupted when she said,
I'm really sorry, Nick. This just isn't me.
His line is that she left the Oasis a wife intact.
I know it makes me sound like President Clinton, but we never actually had sex. Just... do people still say heavy petting?
Subsequently, he says he received a single text from her, reading,
So sorry, Nick. Thank you for being so kind.
But of course, we don't have her phone. So he could have sent the text himself, which is a pretty bog-standard strategy for killers these days. Do I believe him? The problem is that even if he's telling the truth about Oasis Interruptus, saying no to sex is one of the things that can get women killed in this lovely world of ours. And did she say no because of Mr. Lonsdale, or because she had a wider choice?
Is the reason that we enjoy deceit that it makes us feel like characters in a movie? I calculated that the thing most likely to give me away at Westbury Road bus station was my accent, and possibly manners. The 3 people in the queue in front of me didn't say thank you when the driver took their ticket, so neither did I. But I felt rude doing it.
The first time I ever slept with Sue actually was in a hotel in the Yorkshire Dales, first year at Leeds University. She said a hall of residence didn't feel special enough. After careful examination of our grants, they gave us money to study in those days and we didn't have to pay it back. We took a bus up into the Dales. It was November and so cold that after trying naked, like it is in films, we lost our virginities in dressing gowns and socks.
Peter McAndrew's Mercedes. We found it in a grotty lock-up at his factory. Usually used his own special parking space by the door. The CCTV had been turned off, both consistent with a disappearance, but also with abduction or killing.
It must easily have been a quarter of a century since I travelled on an intercity coach. Almost everyone travelling had a double seat to themselves. Most of the other passengers looked like students. The bus constantly bleeping, as if it was a metal detector and the road made of gold, while they texted their progress and plans ahead to what I guessed were their lovers. I sent a text on the new phone I'd taken out of its box that afternoon to the single name stored in it. Peter.
Look, don't tell me there's anyone who hasn't ever thought, when the train comes to the usual stop or the lights change at the junction closest to home, of staying in the carriage or switching the flicker and heading in the opposite direction. Our brains are wired to imagine other lives, and the only difference is that Natasha and I decided to make ours look like deaths. There were times when what we were planning seemed extreme, and others when it felt logical, inevitable. At first, I'd imagined it would just be an affair, but I think the distance was significant. We didn't just want snatched afternoons. Going away together made it seem somehow more pure. Let's wait until we're vanished, you mean?
Yes, I suppose so.
We wanted that phrase people have, to run away. Run away from the expectations and the repetition, the endless repetition and being what other people want us to be.
When we got to Leeds, a lot of the other passengers were met by the person they'd been texting. And I looked at those desperate hugs, bodies pressed hungrily front to front, in that way that can make you hate the young for still having that. And I thought, right now, you think this is all you want, and you might marry and have children, and you can't imagine that one day you'll think, is this it then? Or was I being too romantic? Had some of these ardent travellers come from the beds of others?
Now, this is interesting. Couple on holiday in Yorkshire convinced they saw Natasha Lonsdale getting off a bus in a Dales town. These days, in this nation of David Baileys, there's a picture and she's in a baseball cap and got her hair up, but yeah, it's her.
An old bloke who got off at an earlier stop left a copy of The Sun. There was a piece about me. Cops probe missing businesswoman's love secrets. I folded it into my bag until I got to what we call the safe house. Peter had found the cottage online.
A shrink, I suppose, would say I chose Yorkshire because subconsciously I wanted to be a student again, starting out on everything. I used a false name and made the payments directly to her bank account from a ghost company I'd set up years ago and dribbled bits of money into. I thought of it as an airbag account, in case my life ever crashed for any reason. I transferred 20k to Sue. Why should she suffer? I honestly don't think there's anything she could have done to stop this happening.
It was so long since I'd cooked a meal for which I hadn't chosen the ingredients. This was like one of those cookery shows on television, knocking up a dish from the shopping our Yorkshire landlady had done. I sat with a glass of the Rioja I'd packed in my bag just in case, and read Cops Probe Missing Businesswoman's Love Secrets. The Natasha Lonsdale in the article, this must be what famous people put up with every day, was like a cartoon character. This tart who was boffing half her clients. But it wasn't like that. When I became unhappy and started to think of getting out, I was suddenly aware for the first time that almost every man I met through work seemed to be offering an escape route. Is that just how guys are, driving round like taxis with their light on, hoping to be flagged down? But there was only Nick. Poor Nick, where I couldn't. And now Peter, where I can, I think.
When Andy went to university, we said we'd sell the little Renault we'd bought for him to learn in. The insurance would have been gruesome on our gas guzzlers, but for some reason I kept it in a lock-up at the factory, in his name. In retrospect, a getaway car. Most people on the M1 in the middle of the night, I supposed, were heading home. I got to the cottage at 4 a.m. Natasha had left the door unlocked.
I'm sure he expected me to be in bed. Imagined it, roaring north, with everything that would lead to. He was shocked to find me in the armchair.
We hugged But it was someone letting you rather than them wanting to. Your lips always getting the side of their head, no matter how you move. She said,
I'm sorry, Peter. I'm so very sorry.
What do you mean, silly? You haven't done anything.
And I can't do anything.
I said that we should sleep on it.
Don't let's undo anything hastily.
But she wasn't that stupid.
I want to be the person who can do this. Even need to be, but I'm not her. I insisted we should go. We couldn't stay here. He said...
We're as good as dead now. We can't go back.
I said I'd drive. Where was I planning to go? Nowhere in particular. Just to keep her in the car. Keep the options open. But she wasn't that stupid.
Pete! You won't be able to see in that state. Let me drive.
Policing likes neat lines. A MISPA, an RTA.
An RTA, they called it when they came round.
We had to ask them to explain.
Oh, I'm sorry. Road traffic accident. A MISPA, an RTA, a suicide. These are distinct and separate categories of investigation.
They spun off the motorway, is what they told me. Driving southwards on the M1 in the early hours of the morning. The car belonged to him, but Tash was driving. The road was dry and empty. Visibility was good.
A MISPA and a suicide, clearly, may often overlap. But for these also to be combined with an RTA?
The worst thing is that I'm convinced they'd come to their senses.
Realised they'd had a brainstorm.
And we're driving home.
If you pushed us, I suppose we'd both say, in a smug sort of a way, that we'd given the children a good home.
Money was never an issue, except, I suppose, as a socialist sociologist would say, in not being an issue.
We had an absolute rule
About never arguing in front of them.
which we never did.
Except once.
Did we?
Yes. You absolutely lost it on holiday once.
Perhaps. Holidays could be tense. You hated being away from work.
That's true. I was happier being at home.
At work?
So, it was a good home we gave them, in the sense that our children suffered none of those terrible things you read about. We never hit them, never interfered with them, or openly favoured one over the other.
Although everyone knew Natasha was your favourite.
You always said that, but I dispute it. What I'm saying is that I wonder now, looking back, if some of this isn't our fault.
What do you mean? That she vanished? Or that she became some sort of harlot?
That what happened, happened. I just wonder if we taught her to keep secrets, to keep up appearances at all costs.
I hope you didn't say that to the police.
Although it scarcely now matters in the great scheme of things. If you type into the internet my name with murdered daughter or paedophile ring, the results flood in.
I think they couldn't stand it anymore. If you went up to almost anyone on a crowded platform in the morning and said, "Quick, quick, through this secret door now, a new life," they'd go. But what do I know?
In What Do You Know by Mark Lawson, DCI Parsons was played by Roger Allam and Barbara Margot Lester. Desmond was Andrew Sachs, Natasha Rebecca Sayre, Peter Nick Dunning, Dan John McAndrew, and Nick Richard Dormer. What Do You Know was directed in Belfast by Owen O'Callaghan.